So the last few days I've just been veneering and sanding the base for this sculpture. So this is cast brass. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. The siren's just started going as I press record. So this is a veneered block of MDF veneered with walnut. Once that's oiled, I mean it's just been sanded at the moment, glued and sanded, and once that's oiled it'll obviously take on a bit of a darker colour that we kind of know from walnut. But anyway, more importantly, that's to house, well I guess, be a stand for this sculpture. So I've had 3 new bronzes come to the studio, or rather brass, one of which is this. So this is actually the first sculpture I've made from a new body of work called The Measurements of Men and Their High Horses. I say new, the prints, the etchings, they were made in 2022, I think, maybe earlier. And that was from a study of me in an inflatable dinosaur suit, taking on that kind of common masculine equestrian pose. I was kind of taking on the role of Marcus Aurelius in this kind of lovely equestrian sculpture of him. So generally Roman emperors would destroy the sculptures of the previous emperors and melt them down. However, this survived, as it was believed to have been Constantine, so it survived a little bit longer. Well, I guess a lot longer as it's still here. Anyway, I was taking that as a sort of starting point. I dressed up in an inflatable dinosaur suit. Obviously pulls on kind of this masculine notion of the knight. There's a lot of that sort of arc of the man in it. We've got George and the Dragon and things, and it's like, yeah, it plays with that, but it also brings it into a quite a fun, slightly camp, queer territory, which I find quite fun when infusing with those sort of notions of the man, the hero. Anyway, this is the first sculpture from that body of work. And this is also my first sculpture that's been cast into brass. I love the idea of working with brass. We often obviously would gift a man a medal or a trophy or a badge for his kind of accomplishments. And I think brass is this sort of metal that just starts to sort of symbolise, it's this metal of validation, isn't it, for the man? And so I love using that material for a sculpture that starts to kind of orbit those ideas of masculine power and validation of that power through sculpture. And so this is originally a sculpture of me on the dinosaur suit posing as Marcus Aurelius that has then been pushed through my sculptural process that I'll shared in other videos. That is effectively a 3D printer I bought, extruding porcelain, taking on this mould. So the sculpture itself isn't printed, I print the mould. The sculpture at this point just exists as a ghost-like space inside of this porcelain form. And at various points I start to tease out different figures, different features, and just introduce these elements, sometimes chaotic, sometimes there is more of a kind of, there's this moment of pareidolia, like where you look at a cloud, you see a face, you look at a tree and you see something staring back at you. That often happens with the clay, especially when they start to get, the features start to get this chaotic. Like even here you can see an eye forming in the jaw here, some like kind of spiky coral teeth, and it disappears like in an instant as you turn around. And that's something I love about the works in the studio. They kind of look differently as the light changes over different days. And so this is my first sculpture cast into brass. Brass is slightly different from bronze. So bronze traditionally was a mix of copper and tin. Tin, I believe, has gone up in price, meaning that it's not so available for kind of contemporary sculpture casting. I was reading before about how tin has been used by the kind of electric, I guess, circuit making industry. And so tin has been used, it gets heated up to 1,000 degrees Celsius, I believe, or 1,000,000 degrees Celsius, and it turns into a plasma. This plasma tin emits extreme UV light, which is even finer than UV light. And so this is then focused into a laser and used to etch circuit boards with such a fine wavelength. Even more circuitry kind of traces can be fitted onto these circuits, and at this point in the process they exist as silicon wafers, and that's called EUV, I guess extreme UV. Anyway, that's been responsible for the increase in tin, I believe, probably alongside other factors. And so contemporary bronze mixes, like everything else in my studio, you can probably see some here. Everything, maybe I'll cut some in here, I don't know. Everything else is silicon bronze, so that is largely 90-95% copper with 5% silicon, and that just helps with the hardness and the kind of resistance to oxidization and effects from acid and rain, water, like on and on. And so it just brings copper more into the kind of public sphere of sculpture, and that's bronze. This is brass, which is copper and zinc. And I've had, up until this point, I've had problems casting with brass, even though I wanted to, for all the reasons I was just talking about for quite a long time now. I actually started doing my I switched from making my etchings into copper plates into brass plates because I wanted to see if there was a quality of brass, which obviously we use for validation, but I wanted to see if there was a quality of etching the brass that translated into the way that it etched with lines that would, as I say, translate into the image and carry these notions of sort of validation via the image into my etchings, and that's something I'm still looking at. But this is my first sculpture cast into brass. And the reason for this generally is that the foundry I've previously been working with and a few other foundries I'd approached, when you mention working into brass, they're kind of terrified. And that's because of the existence of something called Brassmaker flue. Welders also get it for the same reason, Galvalung. That's from working with galvanized steel. And what those both share is zinc. Galvanized is quite literally often mild steel dipped in zinc, and the zinc adds a kind of layer of protection to the steel. Similarly, it does the same for brass. It hardens, I believe it hardens, but I know it also obviously adds oxidization, kind of resistant properties. But the problem with zinc is it melts and smokes at a lot lower point than copper does. So by the time you get up to your 1100 degrees Celsius and you've got your copper melted, your zinc's been melted since 600-700 maybe, and at this point it's at a smoke point. So you're in the foundry and the smoke being emitted from this molten metal, and it's like a thick white kind of smoke. And anyway, inhalation of that will give you brass lung, Brassmaker's flue, and I've heard it's absolutely terrible. So that kind of explains the worry that comes over the foundry. These sirens. I guess that explains a little bit of the worry that comes over the kind of casting team's face when I've asked for brass previously. However, Luntz Casting in Birmingham, my first time working with them, apparently the oldest foundry in Birmingham as well, which is quite a fun little fact, have cast this for me. So again, brass, and you can sort of see the one leg. So obviously this dinosaur and me were stood on these little legs before the figure opened up into the dinosaur figure, and then me perched atop here. And I just love how this face started to appear almost as if this is a head in itself. And what I really like is when it's placed, so if you can see, I think you can see, is when it's placed like this. When it's just placed on one foot, obviously my hand will not be there in the final presentation of this piece, but it just balances on this one leg, and it almost looks like an ostrich or a figure feeding, leaning down to feed in like some sort of pool in this area, and it kind of has like this, I guess, this narcissistic Narcissus quality to it. But it also, again, it takes on this much more primal kind of feeding the watering hole sort of quality. And it's sort of, as I say, leaning down to feed from here, and you get all these water-like kind of corally forms here. So I'm quite excited for this piece. I'm just finishing up, as you've seen in the last few videos and things, I'm just finishing up this display stand for it. And then I need to get something welded into the base here. That'll slot in and be bolted in from the bottom, and then this will be polished and waxed, and I'll obviously be making some more footage on that. And just quickly, I'll go over them at a later point when I'm kind of working on them, but these are the two other sculptures that I got back from the foundry. And this silver colouring is actually due to it being cast into white bronze, which again is actually, I think this doesn't have any silicon in it. I believe this is copper, tin, the kind of traditional OG. Well, the OG recipe was copper and arsenic. It's the OG, but the copper and tin is again the OG recipe for now. However, so I think this is copper and tin, and then I think it's actually got zinc added as well, so it kind of sits somewhere between bronze and brass, and this gives you this almost silver-like colouring. I just love where these holes are formed, where the mould's touched. The top and the bottom of the mould have almost kissed inside, and the cavity's been filled in. And this is actually going to be placed. Again, I'll go over this at a later point. It's going to be placed top on a stone. It's going to be like 2.4 metres in the air. And this is going to be enormous, by the way. This is a little baby maquette. This will be 2.4 metres long, I believe. So when you're staring up, looking at the sky, and the sunlight's falling through, I think these will have such a kind of fun effect. And there is another one. I'm less fond of boat geometry. I love the figure. It's so much more expressive. This pose is taken from, I did mention it in a previous video, but it's taken from an etching by Hogarth. I'll probably dot that in now, but that's it's an etching called The Distressed Poet. I absolutely love it. He looks pretty distressed here. This is quite a good rendering of the figure, I think. But yeah, so I'll probably cut into, I'm not sure what I'm working on this afternoon, I think maybe some wiring. But yeah, this needs polishing, but I can't really do a lot until I've gone back to the foundry with that. And then the base just needs oiling, so I think I'm probably wiring this afternoon, getting on to my next project, which is the pump, which I'll check in a minute and show you that.